Hello and welcome. I'm glad you've decided to join me today for a journey into some of the most unusual laws ever written in history. Before we begin, take a moment to get comfortable. Maybe sit back in your favorite chair, stretch out, or just relax however you like. This story is designed to transport you through time, so make sure you're settled in for the ride. If you enjoy exploring strange and fascinating historical stories, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us continue bringing you more incredible tales from the past. And if you'd like, leave a comment sharing the city you're listening from and the time of day. You never know. Seeing where and when people are tuning in adds a fun connection between listeners around the world. Now, let's dive into a world of laws so strange they almost seem unbelievable. Laws about what people could wear, what they could eat, even who they could marry. History has no shortage of surprises. Prepare yourself for a journey through the weirdest, most unexpected, and sometimes hilarious rules that once shaped people's lives. Chapter 1. Bizarre food and drink laws. Through history. Throughout history, laws governing what people could eat and drink were surprisingly strict, and often downright strange. These regulations were far more than mere suggestions. They reflected social hierarchy, moral codes, public health concerns, and even political control. Some laws seem absurd to modern eyes, but at the time, they were enforced with serious consequences, shaping daily life in ways that might feel surreal today. In medieval Europe, sumptuary laws extended beyond clothing into the realm of food. The upper classes were permitted to indulge in luxurious ingredients such as spices, sugar, and exotic meats, while the lower classes were restricted to more humble fare. In England, during the 14th century, a law dictated that only the wealthy could eat swan, a delicacy considered inappropriate for commoners. This legal stratification of food not only reinforced social hierarchies, but also signaled prestige and power. Being caught consuming a forbidden dish could result in fines, public humiliation, or worse. Italy's Renaissance cities had their own peculiar restrictions. In Florence, for instance, authorities regulated the consumption of truffles, mushrooms, and certain types of fish, depending on religious calendars and social rank. These laws weren't arbitrary. They reflected deeply ingrained ideas about morality, health, and piety. Eating the wrong food on the wrong day could be interpreted as a moral transgression, demonstrating how law and religion intertwine to control even the most basic human needs. Across the Atlantic, colonial America saw similarly peculiar legislation. In the 17th and 18th centuries, certain colonies prohibited the sale of chocolate and tea to specific groups. Massachusetts, a Puritan stronghold, occasionally restricted sugary treats for children or servants, believing that indulgence encouraged laziness and immorality. In some towns, it was illegal to sell alcohol to Native Americans or to serve it during religious ceremonies, revealing how law was wielded to enforce moral and social conformity. These restrictions often created underground markets and smuggling networks, highlighting the tension between human desire and legal enforcement. One of the most astonishing historical food laws involved meat. In ancient Rome, laws were enacted regulating the sale and consumption of pork and other meats. Roman magistrates imposed taxes and fines on those who sold or ate certain meats outside designated markets. The rationale combined public health, social order, and economic control. Regulating meat prevented food shortages, ensured quality, and reinforced class distinctions. Violating these laws could lead to public punishment, including fines or, in extreme cases, banishment from the city. Europe also had bizarre prohibitions surrounding everyday drinks, During the 16th century, some towns in Germany and the Low Countries strictly regulated beer and wine consumption. Drinking in public without permission or outside licensed taverns was illegal, punishable by fines or corporal punishment. Authorities justified these laws with concerns about public disorder, drunkenness, and social morality. In this sense, laws about food and drink were not just about taste. They were mechanisms of social control, policing behavior in the streets and homes alike. Oddly specific laws also targeted food preparation. In France, the regulation of bread was a matter of life and death. Bakers were legally required to maintain precise weight and quality standards, and anyone caught cheating customers could face severe punishment, including imprisonment. This law was not only about fairness, it reflected the government's role in ensuring basic sustenance for all citizens. Bread, being a staple of the population, became a focus of legal scrutiny, demonstrating how food could intersect with law, economy, and public welfare. In the Far East, similar principles applied. In Japan during the Edo period, strict laws governed the types of seafood and rice that different social classes could consume. Samurai enjoyed premium rice and exotic fish, while peasants were restricted to coarser grains and limited varieties of fish. These rules reinforced social hierarchies and reminded citizens of their place in the rigidly structured society. Punishments ranged from fines to forced labor, reflecting the serious enforcement of even the most mundane dietary restrictions. Perhaps the most humorous examples of historical food laws involve animal-based prohibitions. In Scotland during the 18th century, it was illegal to eat rabbits on certain days, as the population was considered a protected resource. Similarly, in parts of England, people could be fined for eating eels without proper licensing. While these laws may seem comical today, they were rooted in concerns about resource management, food scarcity, and economic regulation. Interestingly, food and drink laws often revealed cultural fears and prejudices. Colonial American laws restricting alcohol to certain groups, or banning the consumption of exotic spices by commoners, illustrate how societies tried to regulate morality, class, and behavior through legal means. The enforcement of these laws could be arbitrary and harsh, yet they provide historians with a fascinating glimpse into the everyday struggles, desires, and limitations experienced by ordinary people in history. Finally, the legacy of these laws is surprising. While most have long been repealed, some remnants remain. Taxation on certain foods, licensing of alcohol sales, and regulations on public food safety are modern echoes of these ancient restrictions. By studying them, we gain insight into how societies prioritized control, order, and morality, even in something as seemingly mundane as eating a meal or enjoying a drink. In conclusion, the world of historical food and drink laws is both absurd and revealing. They demonstrate that lawmakers were deeply concerned with social order, class distinctions, morality, and health. And while we may laugh at the idea of a law regulating the consumption of rabbits or chocolate, these regulations were serious, enforceable, and shaped the daily lives of millions. From Roman markets to colonial kitchens, these laws remind us that what we eat has always been more than just sustenance. It has been a reflection of societal values, fears, and hierarchies. Chapter 2: The Peculiar Laws of Clothing and Appearance. In the early centuries of recorded history, rulers and lawmakers often sought to control not just the actions of their citizens, but also their appearance. One of the strangest categories of laws that existed throughout the world revolved around clothing, hairstyles, and even the materials used in personal adornment. These laws were more than mere fashion regulations. They were tools of social control, a way to enforce class distinctions, religious conformity, and even moral behavior. Take, for example, the sumptuary laws of medieval and Renaissance Europe. These regulations dictated exactly what a person could wear based on their social rank. A nobleman might be forbidden from wearing gold thread if his rank didn't allow it, while a wealthy merchant could not flaunt silk reserved for the royal family. These rules were strictly enforced, and breaking them could result in hefty fines or public humiliation. In some cases, persistent offenders were forced to stand in the town square wearing a sign describing their transgression, a medieval version of social shaming that seems eerily modern. Across the Atlantic, the American colonies had their own peculiar interpretations of appearance. In certain towns, laws dictated what colors of clothing could be worn on specific occasions or by specific professions. For instance, in Puritan Massachusetts, bright colors were frowned upon because they were considered vain and morally corrupting. People were expected to dress modestly, and a woman's dress was seen not only as a reflection of her personal virtue, but also as an indicator of her family's piety. In one documented case, a woman was fined for wearing a scarlet ribbon in her hair, considered an extravagant and improper display. Meanwhile, in Asia, some rulers took the concept of appearance laws to another level entirely. In ancient China, the Tang dynasty implemented laws that restricted certain hairstyles to members of the royal family or high-ranking officials. Ordinary citizens who attempted to mimic these styles faced severe punishment. The rationale was simple. Appearance denoted hierarchy. By controlling how people dressed and styled themselves, rulers maintained the visual order of society, ensuring that everyone knew their place. Even more peculiar were the laws that targeted specific accessories or adornments. In England during the 16th century, it was illegal for anyone below the rank of noble to wear certain types of jewelry or furs. A commoner caught wearing a fur-lined coat that was reserved for the aristocracy could be fined, or worse, publicly shamed. These rules were not just about vanity. They reinforced social hierarchies and reminded everyone of the rigid structure of society. Some of the strangest clothing laws were surprisingly specific. In ancient Rome, for example, there were regulations concerning the width of toga stripes. Only certain magistrates could wear a toga with broad purple stripes, while ordinary citizens had to settle for narrow stripes or plain white fabric. The color purple itself was a symbol of power and authority, and unauthorized use was considered a direct challenge to the ruling elite. There are records of individuals being prosecuted simply for wearing purple robes without permission, demonstrating the seriousness with which these rules were taken. The practical enforcement of these laws varied. In some societies, it was the responsibility of local officials to patrol markets and public spaces, ensuring compliance. In others, it relied on neighbors reporting violations. This created a culture of surveillance and social policing, where personal fashion choices could easily land someone in trouble. Imagine living in a community where your choice of hat or ribbon could result in a fine, public embarrassment, or even imprisonment. Interestingly, these laws often had unintended consequences. While designed to reinforce hierarchy, they sometimes inspired creativity and rebellion. People found subtle ways to circumvent the rules, using patterns, colors, and accessories in clever ways that technically adhered to the law, while still allowing them to express individuality. For example, a merchant might wear a muted shade of prohibited silk, or embellish a garment with legal embroidery that suggested wealth without violating the letter of the law. The cultural impact of these clothing laws was profound. They shaped social interactions, influenced art and literature, and even affected trade. Weavers, tailors, and jewelers had to navigate complex legal landscapes to ensure their products were lawful. Some laws even dictated the materials that could be imported or sold, creating economic ripple effects throughout communities. In a world where breaking the rules could lead to punishment, compliance became a powerful form of social signaling. Ultimately, the story of clothing and appearance laws reminds us that laws are not only instruments of justice, but also mirrors of societal values. They reveal what cultures valued, feared, or sought to control. The obsession with outward appearance might seem absurd to modern eyes, but it was a matter of daily life, power, and identity in many historical contexts. And while most of these laws have long since faded into obscurity, they leave behind a fascinating glimpse into the lives of people who once navigated a world where even the way they dressed could be dangerous. Chapter 3: Everyday Oddities, Strange Daily Life Laws in History. History is full of laws that govern the minutiae of everyday life, often in ways that seem absurd to modern sensibilities. From rules about how one could walk in the streets to regulations on domestic chores, these laws reveal the meticulous control societies sought to impose on ordinary people. What may appear trivial today was, in its time, a serious matter, reflecting social hierarchy, public order, and moral expectations. In medieval Europe, urban authorities closely regulated citizens' daily routines. For example, in London during the 14th century, it was illegal to block streets with carts or merchandise. Merchants were required to follow strict schedules for deliveries, and anyone obstructing traffic could face fines or public humiliation. This was not mere bureaucratic nitpicking. Medieval cities were crowded, and narrow streets demanded order to prevent accidents, congestion, and fire hazards. Similar laws existed across European cities, where even the width of doorways and overhanging signs could be regulated to ensure smooth passage. In addition to traffic-like regulations, many laws targeted personal hygiene and cleanliness. Medieval French towns often imposed fines on residents who failed to properly dispose of waste. In Paris, throwing refuse into the street could result in public punishment, as the authorities sought to prevent disease and maintain order. Similarly, in Venice, residents were prohibited from washing laundry in canals, both for public health reasons and to maintain the aesthetic of the city. These laws, while peculiar today, illustrate the attention given to public welfare and the ways in which governments intervened in private life. Lighting and noise were also subject to legal control. In 16th century England, curfews required residents to extinguish fires in hearths and lamps at certain hours to prevent nighttime accidents and fires. Town criers would remind citizens of these rules, and violators could face fines or corporal punishment. In Japan, during the Edo period, strict noise ordinances existed. Merchants or travelers making excessive noise after dark could be reprimanded by local authorities. These regulations highlight how law historically penetrated even seemingly personal aspects of life, like the right to light a fire or make sound. Food and drink, while explored in the previous chapter, also intersected with daily life laws. In colonial America, there were regulations on the hours during which taverns could operate. In some towns, it was illegal to serve alcohol before sunrise or after sunset, and bartenders faced fines if they allowed patrons to linger too long. Similarly, in 17th century France, laws dictated how bakers, butchers, and tavern owners conducted their daily operations, from opening hours to pricing, ensuring the population's access to essential goods while maintaining public order. Housing and property were another area of rigorous regulation. In 18th century London, building ordinances required that houses be constructed with fire-resistant materials and at specific distances from the street. Windows, chimneys, and roof heights were controlled to prevent disasters and maintain uniformity. In some towns, there were bizarrely specific rules. One could be fined for having a door that opened outward rather than inward, or for allowing a gutter to overflow into the street. Such laws show the meticulous attention to detail, as authorities sought to govern both aesthetic and practical aspects of citizens' lives. Public behavior was also policed in ways that seem extreme today. In Venice, it was once illegal to kiss in public squares, a regulation meant to maintain decorum and prevent disorder among the populace. Meanwhile, in parts of England, spitting in public or whistling in the streets could result in fines. These rules reveal a society deeply invested in public morality, where even minor breaches of etiquette were codified into law. Strangely specific laws existed around personal appearance and grooming as well. In medieval Europe, it was illegal for men of certain classes to wear certain colors or fabrics, but these rules also applied to hairstyles and accessories. In colonial America, Puritan communities often fined individuals for extravagant clothing or jewelry, seeing vanity as morally dangerous. Some Japanese towns had rules dictating the height of women's hairstyles, believing that overly elaborate hairdos were distractions and signs of moral laxity. Through these regulations, governments and religious authorities attempted to shape both social hierarchy and moral conduct through physical appearance. Pets and animals were also surprisingly regulated. In 17th century England, it was illegal to allow pigs to roam freely in certain towns, while in France, owners of dogs had to ensure that their animals did not harass neighbors or damage crops. Violators faced fines, and persistent offenders could have their animals confiscated. This legal control of animals illustrates the extension of law into everyday interactions, where even the conduct of one's pet could be considered a matter of public concern. Finally, sanitation and safety laws frequently intersected with domestic routines. In the Ottoman Empire, homeowners were required to maintain clean streets in front of their properties, and failure to do so could result in a fine or forced labor. In Paris, fire regulations dictated that flammable materials must be stored safely, and residents could be punished if their negligence caused a fire. These laws show that governments historically assumed responsibility for public safety, not just in markets or streets, but in the intimate spaces of daily life. In conclusion, everyday life laws throughout history illustrate a world where the minutiae of personal behavior, household management, and public interaction were heavily monitored and legislated. From street regulations to noise control, sanitation, property construction, and animal management, these rules governed what people could do, when they could do it, and even how they should look. By examining these laws, we gain insight into the values, fears, and priorities of past societies, understanding that the mundane aspects of daily life were often arenas of legal control, moral guidance, and social structuring. Chapter 4. Bizarre laws about marriage and family. Throughout history, laws governing marriage, family, and inheritance have often taken peculiar forms, reflecting social norms, religious beliefs, and the desire of authorities to control private life. Some of these statutes seem almost absurd by today's standards, yet they were legally binding and rigorously enforced in various societies across Europe, Asia, and the American colonies. In many cases, these laws reveal a combination of moral policing, protection of property, and social engineering. In medieval England, the legal concept of coverture dictated that a married woman had no separate legal identity from her husband. Under this system, wives could not own property independently, enter contracts, or sue in court. While this law served to consolidate family wealth and ensure patriarchal control, it produced unusual cases. For instance, disputes arose when a wife inherited property from her parents prior to marriage. Courts were often called upon to determine whether this inheritance should pass immediately to her husband or remain under her control. Historical records recount numerous cases where widows attempted to reclaim family assets, highlighting the tension between societal norms and individual rights. Other laws targeted marriage eligibility and fidelity. In 17th century colonial America, particularly in Puritan settlements, strict rules governed courtship, premarital relations, and adultery. Couples were often required to obtain approval from local elders before marrying, and violations of sexual norms could result in public shaming, fines, or even corporal punishment. In one documented case in Massachusetts, a young couple was fined for engaging in premarital intimacy, with the town meeting enforcing penalties not only on the individuals, but sometimes also on their families for failing to supervise them. Such laws reveal how communal oversight extended into intimate aspects of life, turning private relationships into matters of public concern. Divorce, too, was highly regulated and bizarre in certain contexts. In 18th century Scotland, grounds for divorce included adultery and desertion, but the legal process was often convoluted and expensive, favoring the wealthy. Some regions imposed additional restrictions, such as mandatory counseling, reconciliation attempts, or even church-led investigations. Historical anecdotes describe husbands petitioning courts to prove their wives' alleged misconduct through testimony from neighbors, servants, and relatives, creating a legal theater that would seem surreal today. Meanwhile, women seeking divorce faced even greater obstacles, sometimes requiring proof of physical abuse or severe neglect. These laws, while ostensibly moral, often produced unintended social consequences, including secretive behavior, false accusations, and community gossip. Inheritance laws also contributed to bizarre outcomes. In many European societies, primogeniture, the right of the eldest son to inherit the entirety of an estate, was legally enforced to maintain family wealth and titles. Yet these laws produced odd disputes when younger siblings, stepchildren, or illegitimate offspring contested inheritances. Court records describe cases in which siblings argued over minuscule portions of estates, such as a single bed or livestock, often escalating into prolonged legal battles. Some towns even had statutes dictating specific proportions of estates for unmarried daughters, widows, and distant relatives, with local officials ensuring strict compliance. These rules, seemingly trivial, dictated family alliances, economic security, and social hierarchies for generations. Certain regions implemented highly unusual marital restrictions. In parts of Italy and Spain, laws prohibited marrying within a certain degree of kinship, sometimes extending to distant cousins or even godparents. Violating these regulations could nullify marriages or impose heavy fines. Conversely, in colonial Virginia, some local ordinances forbade marrying outside one's religious denomination, reflecting both social conservatism and the intertwining of legal and spiritual authority. The enforcement of such rules often required detailed genealogical knowledge, and parish records played a central role in verifying eligibility. This intertwining of personal life and bureaucratic oversight created a social landscape where marriage was as much a legal matter as an emotional or religious one. Another striking set of laws involved dowries and bride prices. In medieval Europe, a dowry was often mandatory, and failure to provide it could annul marriages or lead to public scandal. Historical court documents show instances in which brides' families were forced to pay fines equivalent to several months' wages for failing to deliver agreed-upon dowries, sometimes resulting in extended litigation or the intervention of local nobility. In some cases, dowries were so meticulously regulated that even minor discrepancies in inventory lists could result in legal penalties. Meanwhile, in parts of Asia, bride price disputes occasionally escalated into village-wide conflicts, illustrating how legal enforcement intersected with community honor and economic considerations. The regulation of family life extended to child rearing as well. In colonial Massachusetts, laws dictated appropriate supervision, schooling, and labor for children. Parents could face fines or corporal punishment for neglecting to educate or care for their offspring adequately. Some towns even required orphans to be apprenticed to responsible households, with contracts legally binding both guardians and municipal authorities. Such laws, while rooted in protection and social order, often produced bizarre situations where disputes over custody, labor, and apprenticeship required extensive court involvement. Marriage, inheritance, and family laws sometimes intersected with social stratification in surprising ways. Nobility, clergy, and wealthy merchants often enjoyed exemptions or privileges under the law, while commoners faced stricter enforcement. This created an environment where legal outcomes could dramatically differ based on social standing, gender, and wealth. Documents from the period illustrate cases where laws intended to regulate morality and order inadvertently reinforced inequality and produced absurd legal spectacles, including public trials for trivial family disputes. In sum, the strange laws surrounding marriage and family highlight the intricate relationship between personal life and legal authority in history. While many statutes might seem bizarre or excessive today, they reveal a world where law sought to regulate morality, property, and social hierarchy simultaneously. Citizens navigated these rules carefully, employing cunning, negotiation, or quiet resistance to secure their interests. By studying these peculiar regulations, modern readers gain insight into how societies balanced private desires, communal norms, and legal control, demonstrating that even the most intimate aspects of life were historically subject to formal oversight. Chapter 5. Strange Work and Profession Laws. In the vast tapestry of human history, work has always been a central part of life. But across time and geography, lawmakers have occasionally introduced rules so peculiar that they seem almost comical today. From professions forbidden to certain social classes, to bizarre regulations about the tools and tasks of everyday trades, the laws governing work reveal not just the economy of a society, but also its anxieties, prejudices, and obsessions. In medieval Europe, guilds were powerful institutions, controlling who could practice a trade and under what conditions. Yet, these guilds often enforced rules that now seem absurd. In 15th century London, for instance, a law dictated that no baker could sell bread on certain days if it exceeded a specific weight, lest it be considered fraudulent. While it may sound reasonable as a consumer protection measure, the law became a source of endless dispute, as bakers tried to find loopholes. One record describes a baker secretly baking heavier loaves at night to sell under the radar, only to be fined the next day. This law, seemingly minor, demonstrates how intricate and prescriptive regulations could govern everyday labor and trade. Moving beyond Europe, in colonial America, some colonies imposed strict occupational rules that reflected social hierarchies and moral codes. In Massachusetts Bay Colony, it was illegal for women to work as blacksmiths, not due to a lack of skill, but because of beliefs about propriety and gender roles. One case recounts a woman named Elizabeth Hart, who secretly assisted her husband in forging tools for the community. When discovered, she was fined and publicly admonished, illustrating how laws could enforce social norms under the guise of occupational regulation. Even beyond gender, certain trades face scrutiny for moral reasons. In England, during the 17th century, laws forbade actors from performing without a license, and yet the licensing system was notoriously capricious. Some performers could be punished simply for portraying the wrong type of character or for performing at an unauthorized venue. There are surviving court records of a traveling troupe fined because one actor played a dishonorable character in a comedic scene, which, according to the magistrate, could corrupt the local population. The absurdity of such laws highlights the tension between creative expression and societal control. Another fascinating example comes from 18th century France. Carpenters were required to adhere to precise standards, not just for structural integrity, but also for the aesthetic quality of their work. If a beam or door frame did not meet a municipal inspector's subjective sense of beauty, fines could be imposed. One surviving anecdote recounts a carpenter spending a week adjusting a door's paneling to satisfy a particularly finicky inspector, illustrating how professional laws could intersect oddly with personal taste and bureaucratic power. But it was not only tradespeople who suffered under unusual work regulations. Farmers, too, were subject to bizarre laws. In parts of Prussia, during the 1700s, peasants were prohibited from ploughing fields on certain religious feast days, even if heavy rains threatened their crops. Breaking this law could result in fines or corporal punishment. Yet, the rationale was deeply tied to religious and moral considerations. Working on a holy day was considered sinful, even if practical considerations would argue otherwise. This demonstrates how laws regulating work could be intertwined with spiritual oversight, showing a society where labor was never purely economic. Maritime professions also had their share of peculiar legislation. In 16th century Venice, shipbuilders were legally required to test their vessels in a specific canal before selling them. The test involved not only checking the hull's integrity, but also the speed and noise of the oars. Ships that produced too much clatter were fined for potentially disturbing the peace. While the practical need to ensure seaworthiness is clear, the emphasis on noise introduces a fascinating layer of civic control and aesthetic expectation rarely seen in modern regulations. Some laws even extended to the minutiae of daily workplace behavior. In Renaissance Florence, tailors were forbidden to gossip about their patrons in public. This law, enforced by fines and community shaming, was designed to protect the reputations of the wealthy clients. One case report tells of a tailor fined heavily after commenting on the supposedly indulgent lifestyle of a local merchant. Such legislation illustrates how occupational rules often served broader societal functions, intertwining trade with morality and hierarchy. Interestingly, peculiar work laws were not confined to Europe. In Edo period Japan, artisans and shopkeepers were sometimes restricted by the government in seemingly trivial ways. Certain types of lantern makers were prohibited from producing specific decorative designs, as the shogunate feared that these motifs could suggest political allegiances or be seen as disrespectful to authority. This meant that craftsmen had to navigate not just technical skill, but also political and cultural restrictions, making their work a delicate dance between creativity and obedience. Even as societies modernized, strange occupational laws persisted. In 19th century America, some towns enacted ordinances forbidding women from operating certain machinery in factories, citing health concerns and moral propriety. While framed as protective measures, these laws effectively limited economic opportunity and reinforced gender hierarchies. A striking anecdote from Philadelphia recounts a female textile worker who was publicly reprimanded for operating a loom after dark, even though the factory was in compliance with all safety measures. Such enforcement underscores how legal oversight of work could be both arbitrary and morally prescriptive. In sum, the laws regulating work and professions across history offer a window into the anxieties, prejudices, and priorities of societies. Whether it was controlling the weight of bread, limiting who could forge iron, or dictating how ships were tested, these laws reveal the intricate web between labor, morality, and social control. They demonstrate that what may seem like mundane occupational regulation can, in fact, be a reflection of cultural values and societal fears, preserved in the strange and often humorous codices of law. Chapter 6. Peculiar laws about public behavior and conduct. Public behavior has always been at the core of legal oversight. Governments, magistrates, and local authorities have long sought to control not only what people do in private, but also how they present themselves in public spaces. The laws governing conduct were often bizarre by today's standards, reflecting societal anxieties about morality, order, and communal reputation. In medieval England, for instance, there were laws regulating how people could walk or ride in the streets. In some towns, it was illegal to carry a bow in public unless one was on official business or training for military duty. The reason was practical: accidental injury. But the law's enforcement sometimes reached absurd extremes. Records from 14th century London recount a man fined simply for carrying a bow to a wedding, as the local constable argued that its presence could startle the populace and invite suspicion of rebellion. This seemingly minor law illustrates the pervasive surveillance of daily life in pre-modern cities. Meanwhile, in Renaissance Venice, citizens faced strict rules about attire in public spaces. While some laws were practical, like requiring citizens to wear shoes to prevent disease, others were bizarre in their specificity. One regulation forbade men from wearing certain colors that could mimic the uniforms of state officials to prevent confusion or perceived impersonation. There is a surviving case of a tailor fined for outfitting a client in an outfit considered too official, which demonstrates how even minor fashion choices could trigger legal action. Public speech was also heavily policed in historical societies. In 17th century France, laws against slanderous words were frequently enforced, sometimes for statements as mundane as criticizing a local merchant or commenting on a neighbor's appearance. Court records from Lyon recount a baker fined for telling patrons that a local politician was fat and slow, a remark deemed injurious to civic harmony. The law reveals how public speech could be criminalized not merely for political dissent, but for social critique, highlighting a tension between personal expression and enforced civility. In Japan's Edo period, the Tokugawa shogunate enacted regulations dictating how citizens could behave in public spaces. People were forbidden from singing loudly, whistling at night, or creating unnecessary disturbances under threat of fines or public punishment. Merchants were particularly scrutinized, as street noise or boisterous behavior could be construed as disturbing commerce or public order. One story recounts a street performer who was detained for whistling a tune considered too lively near a marketplace, revealing a society intensely focused on decorum and the perception of order. Even in the American colonies, public conduct was tightly regulated. In 18th century Massachusetts, laws mandated that citizens attend church on Sundays and prohibited gambling, drinking, or socializing in ways deemed immoral. One peculiar regulation dictated that it was illegal to kiss your spouse in public. While intended to maintain decorum, these laws were sometimes enforced with public shaming. Violators could be fined, whipped, or forced to stand on the town scaffold. The law demonstrates how authorities attempted to regulate intimate and social behaviors, making public morality a civic responsibility. The 19th century United States had its own share of oddities. In some towns, it was illegal to whistle on a Sunday, echoing the colonial concern with Sabbath observance. In others, it was forbidden to walk down the street with an improperly dressed horse, as local ordinances aimed to preserve both order and aesthetics. Court cases reveal citizens arguing passionately over whether a horse's mane or tail length constituted a legal violation. Such regulations may seem trivial, but they offer insight into the meticulous control communities exercised over daily life. Europe was no stranger to regulating public amusements and leisure activities. In 16th century Germany, authorities imposed fines for playing games like chess or cards in public spaces, fearing they could incite gambling or idleness. A documented case in Nuremberg describes a young man fined for organizing a chess game outside the town hall, which distracted passers-by from their work and disturbed civic order. These examples highlight how laws were used to shape public behavior down to the smallest social interactions. Even seemingly harmless acts could be criminalized. In Sweden, it was illegal for men to kiss women in public squares without formal courtship approval. Records describe a young man fined and publicly shamed for embracing his fiancée outside the market. Such laws were designed to preserve social hierarchies, honor, and moral conduct, illustrating that public law enforcement often blended moral, cultural, and civic concerns into one legal framework. Strangely, some laws targeted seasonal behaviors. In 18th century Europe, throwing snowballs or participating in snow fights was prohibited in certain towns, as authorities feared it might escalate into disorderly conduct or property damage. One decree from a German town fined children for engaging in winter play near streets or markets. Though the rationale seems trivial, it underscores a historical trend of codifying almost every aspect of daily life under legal oversight. Finally, bizarre public conduct laws extended to animals as well. In medieval England, it was illegal to let your pigs roam the streets without supervision. Violators could face fines, as unsupervised animals were considered a public nuisance. In one amusing case, a man was brought to court because his pigs wandered into the marketplace and disrupted a festival. Here, laws blurred the line between regulating human behavior and controlling the environment to preserve communal order. Overall, strange laws governing public behavior reveal societies obsessed with control, order, and appearances. Whether regulating how people walked, spoke, dressed, or interacted, authorities attempted to codify morality and civility into enforceable rules. These laws, often arbitrary and sometimes humorous, provide a vivid lens into the fears, values, and priorities of historical communities, showing that even the simplest daily acts could be subject to legal scrutiny. Chapter 7. Absurd tax laws and peculiar economic regulations. Throughout history, taxation has been one of the most creative and sometimes ridiculous ways governments have attempted to manage their populations. Beyond raising revenue, tax laws were often tools of social control, signaling political priorities, moral expectations, and even societal anxieties. While modern readers might view taxation as mundane, historical records reveal a world where authorities levied taxes on everything from windows to beards, producing absurd consequences for ordinary citizens. One of the most famous examples comes from 18th century England, the window tax. Enacted in 1696, this law taxed homeowners based on the number of windows in their homes. At first glance, it seems logical, a proxy for wealth, but enforcement and unintended consequences made it bizarre. Homeowners bricked up windows to reduce their tax burden, creating dark, poorly ventilated living spaces. Architectural historians note that some facades of Georgian houses still reveal these bricked-up windows, remnants of citizens' quiet rebellion against an intrusive law. In addition, public health concerns emerged, as reduced sunlight and ventilation contributed to the spread of disease. Similarly, in France during the reign of Louis XIV, an array of taxes applied to mundane items and daily activities. The tile, a direct tax on the peasantry, was complemented by levies on salt, known as the gabelle, as well as taxes on playing cards, hats, and even door hinges. Court records describe townspeople scheming to circumvent the salt tax, smuggling or diluting it in clandestine operations. One account tells of a small village that staged an elaborate ruse, pretending that salt shipments had been stolen by highwaymen, all to avoid paying the gabelle. Such tales highlight the ingenuity of ordinary citizens and the extremes of bureaucratic oversight. In the Ottoman Empire, taxation also reached unusual extremes. The tax on coffee in 17th century Istanbul exemplifies a law with both economic and social implications. Coffee houses had proliferated as centers of social interaction, and authorities feared that these venues could foment political dissent. By taxing coffee consumption and licensing coffee houses, the government attempted to monitor public gathering spots while increasing state revenue. Surviving documents reveal that coffee house owners had to register with local authorities, pay fees, and even submit lists of patrons, blending fiscal and social control. Across the Atlantic, colonial America had its share of strange economic regulations. The 1765 Stamp Act, which imposed a tax on printed materials, ignited widespread protest, illustrating that even mundane financial laws could provoke major political upheaval. Less well known were local ordinances, such as taxes on playing cards, dice, and even beards. In New England, one town imposed a fine on men who refused to maintain their beards according to a civilized standard, ostensibly to promote hygiene, decorum, and civic conformity. This peculiar combination of taxation, appearance regulation, and moral oversight demonstrates the multi-layered objectives of seemingly absurd laws. Odd economic laws extended to food and drink as well. In medieval Europe, bakers were subject to rigorous regulations. In France, the gros-pain law dictated not only the size and price of bread, but also imposed fines on bakers who deviated. One record recounts a baker in 15th century Paris who was publicly punished for producing bread slightly smaller than mandated, resulting in a public apology and confiscation of unsold goods. Similarly, in England, laws mandated that ale brewers maintain consistent quality, weight, and strength of beer. Violators could face fines or imprisonment, demonstrating how governments sought to safeguard both economic stability and public health. Even ceremonial taxes could be bizarre. In Russia, under Tsar Peter the Great, there was a tax on beards to encourage Western-style grooming. The law required men to pay a fee for maintaining a beard, with the amount varying by social status. Tax collectors issued metal tokens to men who paid, creating a bureaucratic spectacle and a source of social commentary. Satirical pamphlets of the era criticized the law, mocking both the Tsar's obsession with appearance and the authorities' meticulous enforcement. Weird tax laws were also tied to emerging industries. In 18th century Britain, taxes on newspapers and pamphlets were intended to control information dissemination. Publishers frequently circumvented these levies by issuing publications in smaller formats, splitting issues into multiple parts, or exploiting legal loopholes. Court cases document disputes over whether a pamphlet's length or format constituted a taxable paper, revealing the intersection of law, commerce, and political influence. Across different cultures, governments experimented with levies on almost every conceivable aspect of life. In Japan, during the Edo period, merchants were taxed for the size and visibility of their shop signs. Regulations stipulated specific dimensions, colors, and even font styles. Records show inspectors measuring shop signs with rulers and fines issued for deviations of mere inches. The law underscores how regulation was used to shape public aesthetics and economic behavior simultaneously. Taxes on leisure activities were equally peculiar. In Scotland, authorities imposed levies on activities like bowling and archery practice. Court records from Edinburgh in the 17th century recount disputes over whether casual archery practice in one's backyard could be considered taxable. These examples reflect a historical pattern. Governments often attempted to regulate behavior not only to generate revenue, but also to enforce moral, social, and political norms. Ultimately, the story of absurd economic regulations and peculiar taxes reveals societies preoccupied with control and order, even at the cost of common sense. From windows to beards, from coffee houses to shop signs, the law extended into the minutiae of daily life, influencing architecture, social conduct, and personal choices. By examining these historical examples, we gain insight not only into governmental priorities, but also into human ingenuity, resistance, and adaptation in the face of bizarre legal frameworks. Chapter 8: Strange Laws, Governing Travel and Transportation. From ancient times to the early modern era, societies imposed peculiar laws on how people moved from place to place. Travel was not merely a personal choice. It intersected with commerce, military readiness, public safety, and social hierarchy. Consequently, governments often regulated transportation in ways that appear bizarre to modern eyes. These laws reveal both the ingenuity and the rigidity of historical authorities, as well as the everyday struggles of ordinary travelers navigating a web of restrictions. In medieval England, the law dictated strict rules for the use of horses on public roads. Horses were taxed according to breed, size, and even color. One account details a nobleman fined for riding a black stallion without paying the requisite tax, despite claiming the horse was a family heirloom. Beyond taxation, local ordinances required travelers to announce their journey in advance if they were moving through multiple parishes, ostensibly to prevent highway robbery and protect livestock. Chroniclers note that these regulations often slowed commerce and forced travelers to plan weeks ahead for relatively short trips. The Venetian Republic, famous for its canals, also had stringent rules on transportation. Gondolas, the signature mode of travel, were subject to strict licensing. Each gondolier had to register with local authorities, follow prescribed routes, and maintain a uniform appearance. Violations could result in fines or temporary bans. Public records recount instances where gondoliers were punished for minor deviations, such as carrying an extra passenger or straying too close to another gondola's territory. These regulations exemplify how economic control, aesthetics, and public order intertwined in governing movement. In the Ottoman Empire, travel laws were tied to social status. Travelers had to carry permits known as barats, specifying their destination and purpose. Violating these rules could result in fines, imprisonment, or confiscation of property. Merchants faced particularly burdensome restrictions, as authorities often used checkpoints to levy additional taxes on goods in transit. Interestingly, some travelers developed intricate networks of bribes and coded language to navigate the bureaucracy, highlighting the tension between law and human ingenuity. The American colonies also offer striking examples. In 18th century Boston, horse-drawn carriages were subject to licensing fees, and certain streets were off-limits to vehicles during market days. Town councils issued detailed ordinances specifying the number of wheels, types of harnesses, and even the height of carriages. One court case recounts a citizen fined for allowing his cart to exceed the height limit by merely 2 inches, prompting a public debate over the reasonableness of local governance. Railway laws in 19th century Britain reflect a different kind of absurdity. Early rail operators were required to maintain precise schedules, but regulations also dictated the number of windows per carriage, the height of steps, and even the colour of train whistles. Violators risked fines for non-compliance, regardless of whether these details affected safety or efficiency. Inspectors were dispatched to measure and record these specifications, leaving passengers unaware that behind-the-scenes bureaucracy shaped every journey. Maritime law provides another treasure trove of peculiar regulations. In 17th century France, ship captains were required to keep detailed logs of both cargo and crew, with fines imposed for minor discrepancies. In England, pilots navigating the Thames had to follow precise instructions for docking and anchoring, often under threat of penalties if tides or wind forced deviations. One account describes a pilot fined for mooring slightly upstream from the designated location, illustrating the inflexibility of maritime bureaucracy. Travel-related laws sometimes intersected with morality and social order. In some parts of Europe, nighttime travel was heavily restricted, ostensibly to prevent criminal activity. Citizens traveling after sunset needed official permission or risked arrest. In Venice, travelers without proper documentation could be detained until authorities verified their identity and intentions. These measures reflect the dual purpose of travel regulations: controlling movement and policing behavior. Odd rules extended even to pedestrian movement. In 18th century Paris, citizens were prohibited from carrying certain objects on the streets, such as long poles, to prevent accidental injury and maintain traffic flow. London had similar ordinances regulating walking pace and street conduct in crowded markets. Historical accounts describe conflicts between pedestrians and law enforcement, demonstrating that even mundane movement could attract legal scrutiny. Interestingly, some laws arose from superstition or belief in cosmic order. In Edo period Japan, travelers crossing certain bridges had to adhere to rituals or pay offerings to avoid misfortune. These laws were formally codified and enforced by local officials, blending spiritual belief with administrative control. Travelers who ignored such customs risked fines or social ostracism, highlighting the complex interplay of religion, law, and travel. From horse-drawn carts to modern trains, history demonstrates that societies have been deeply invested in controlling movement. Whether for economic, moral, or safety reasons, travel laws shape the daily experience of individuals and communities. By examining these absurd regulations, we gain insight into the priorities, fears, and bureaucratic ingenuity of past civilizations, as well as the lengths to which ordinary people went to navigate and sometimes circumvent the legal landscape. Chapter 9. Unusual Crime and Punishment Laws. Throughout history, societies have devised creative and sometimes shocking methods to define and punish crime. While some laws were straightforward, others seem utterly bizarre to modern sensibilities. These laws often reflected societal fears, moral codes, or political objectives, rather than practical considerations. Examining unusual crime and punishment laws reveals both the extremes of human creativity and the harsh realities of historical justice. In medieval England, theft laws could be surprisingly severe. Stealing livestock or crops sometimes warranted the death penalty, regardless of the thief's social standing. Chroniclers recount cases in which a single stolen sheep led to public execution, highlighting the value placed on property and the harsh deterrent strategies of the time. However, punishments could also be highly symbolic. For example, petty thieves might be subjected to public humiliation, such as being placed in a stocks or pillory, often accompanied by ridicule from local townspeople. One particularly curious law involved the use of animals in legal proceedings. In parts of Europe, pigs accused of damaging crops or attacking humans were sometimes put on trial. Records indicate that animals were provided legal representation and tried in court, complete with appointed advocates. Punishments ranged from fines imposed on the owners to execution of the animal, depending on the severity of the offense. These bizarre practices underline how seriously communities took property rights and public safety, extending legal responsibility even to non-human actors. Capital punishment practices could also be unusual. In 16th century France, individuals guilty of certain crimes could be executed by strangulation or by being burned in effigy if they had fled the country. In England, laws mandated that traitors' heads be displayed on city gates, not just as a punishment, but as a public warning. This blending of justice and spectacle demonstrates how law serves social and psychological purposes beyond mere retribution. In colonial America, some crimes had highly specific punishments. For instance, adultery or fornication could result in fines, public shaming, or even branding. One famous case involved a man who was required to wear a letter A embroidered on his clothing for a year, marking his transgression for all to see. Such punishments functioned as moral instruction, aiming to deter similar behavior within the community. Historical diaries reveal the psychological toll of these penalties, as individuals lived under constant public scrutiny. Another peculiar area of law involved economic crimes. In 18th century London, counterfeiters were considered among the most dangerous criminals. Beyond imprisonment or execution, authorities sometimes imposed unique penalties, such as forcing offenders to wear identifying badges or work publicly to repair damaged infrastructure. These measures reinforced social order and underscored the community's investment in financial stability. Some laws targeted behavior that seems arbitrary to modern readers. In parts of medieval Europe, insulting a nobleman's dog could be considered a punishable offense. Records from a 15th century French court detail a citizen fined for striking a noble's lapdog with a stick, emphasizing how laws were deeply intertwined with social hierarchies and personal privilege. Similarly, in Japan's Edo period, citizens could face severe penalties for failing to bow correctly to authorities or for improper conduct during festivals, demonstrating that crime and punishment often encompassed etiquette and ritual as much as tangible harm. Punishments also took creative forms designed to maximize humiliation. In 17th century Germany, for example, thieves might be forced to wear a scold's bridle, a metal contraption that covered the face and mouth, preventing speech. Public parades with offenders on display were common across Europe, blending judicial procedure with theatrical spectacle. These practices served to instill fear, entertain the community, and reinforce moral lessons simultaneously. In Scandinavian countries, certain crimes against nature or superstition carried extreme legal consequences. Witchcraft accusations often led to elaborate trials where individuals were subjected to tests like swimming or being pricked for signs of magical power. Convicted witches could be executed or banished, reflecting societal anxieties about unexplained phenomena. Legal records show that even minor suspicions could trigger complex judicial proceedings, illustrating the tension between law, belief, and evidence. Oddities in punishment were not limited to Europe. In colonial India, British authorities enforced strict laws regulating both local customs and imported practices. Violations could result in bizarre penalties, such as temporary exile, forced labor in public works, or symbolic acts of submission. Travelers' diaries describe scenes in which community members were compelled to participate in punitive ceremonies, underscoring the performative aspect of justice. By examining these unusual crime and punishment laws, we gain insight into societal priorities and fears across time. Legal systems were shaped not only by logic and fairness, but also by tradition, superstition, and social control. From public shaming to animal trials, these measures illuminate a world in which law was both a tool of order and a reflection of cultural imagination, revealing that human creativity extends even into the realm of justice. Chapter 10. Strange economic and trade laws. Throughout history, societies have implemented unusual economic and trade regulations that seem bizarre to modern eyes. These laws were designed to control markets, maintain social order, protect consumers, or preserve cultural norms. But many appear outright eccentric or arbitrary today. Examining these regulations reveals the complexities of historical economies and the creative, sometimes absurd, lengths governments went to enforce them. One striking example comes from medieval England, where sumptuary laws dictated what individuals could buy, sell, and wear based on their social class. Merchants, artisans, and nobles were restricted in the types of fabrics, jewelry, and clothing they could trade or purchase. Violating these rules could result in fines, public shaming, or confiscation of goods. Sumptuary laws were designed to maintain social hierarchies, but they also deeply influenced trade practices and consumer behavior, creating an unusual overlap between economics, morality, and law enforcement. In colonial America, economic laws sometimes targeted seemingly trivial matters. For instance, certain colonies restricted the production or sale of alcoholic beverages, even limiting the size of barrels or types of drinks that could be sold. These regulations were intended to control public morality and curb social disorder, but they also had economic consequences. Local brewers and tavern owners had to navigate a web of restrictions, and violations could lead to fines or the revocation of trade licenses. Diaries and court records show that these laws were frequently contested, leading to creative workarounds and occasional black market trade. Another curious category of economic regulation involved pricing laws. In ancient Rome, the government periodically issued edicts to fix the prices of essential goods like grain, wine, and oil. The lex frumentaria and related decrees were meant to prevent price gouging and ensure food stability for citizens, but enforcing these laws proved challenging. Merchants often circumvented regulations by reducing the quality of goods, selling smaller portions, or using secret networks to bypass inspectors. Legal records and letters from Roman officials illustrate the constant struggle between regulation and market forces. Certain laws also restricted the sale of imported goods. In Japan, during the Edo period, The Sakoku policy limited foreign trade to designated ports and prohibited unauthorized imports. Violators could face imprisonment, confiscation, or even execution. These regulations were designed to protect domestic industries, control cultural influence, and maintain political stability. Traders had to navigate a labyrinth of rules, including licenses, taxes, and surveillance, which created both legal and logistical challenges. The complex interplay between trade law and international relations highlights how economic regulation often carried broader social and political objectives. Some economic laws targeted everyday consumer goods in highly specific ways. In 18th century France, bakers were required to produce bread of a certain weight, texture, and price. Inspectors roamed towns to ensure compliance, and failure to adhere to these standards could result in fines or imprisonment. The so-called police des grains was designed to prevent famine and social unrest, but it also produced stories of extreme enforcement. Historical records recount bakers being punished for minor deviations or for allegedly conspiring to manipulate grain prices, underscoring the tension between government control and everyday commerce. Unusual trade laws also appeared in the context of guilds and monopolies. In medieval Europe, guilds tightly regulated who could enter certain trades, what tools they could use, and even the hours they could operate. Violating guild rules could lead to fines, exclusion, or public reprimand. While these laws ensured quality and protected members' economic interests, they sometimes resulted in absurd scenarios. For instance, a shoemaker might be fined for creating boots too quickly or for experimenting with unapproved stitching techniques. These measures reflect the delicate balance between craftsmanship, commerce, and control. Colonial India under British rule provides additional examples. Authorities imposed detailed regulations on salt, textiles, and spices, often dictating prices, quality, and methods of production. The salt tax, in particular, became infamous for its economic and political impact. Local populations were legally required to purchase salt only from authorized sources, leading to widespread resistance. Historical accounts document clever strategies to evade the law, from secret production to smuggling, revealing how economic restrictions could shape social behavior and even inspire rebellion. Even everyday transactions could be subject to peculiar legal oversight. In parts of Renaissance Italy, vendors were prohibited from selling goods after sunset or from selling to certain social classes. Market inspectors maintained lists of approved tradespeople, monitored weights and measures, and recorded violations meticulously. Failure to comply could lead to public fines or confiscation of merchandise. These laws illustrate how regulation extended into the minutiae of daily life, blending commerce, morality, and community standards. Finally, some laws aim to control speculative or risky economic behaviors. In colonial England, lotteries, gambling, and betting were strictly regulated. Authorities feared social destabilization and moral corruption, imposing fines, imprisonment, or public shaming on violators. Paradoxically, these laws often encourage clandestine markets and innovative evasion tactics. Court documents reveal the creativity of both enforcers and offenders, highlighting the dynamic tension between law, economy, and human ingenuity. By exploring strange economic and trade laws, we gain insight into how societies sought to regulate human behavior, ensure stability, and reflect moral priorities through commerce. From sumptuary restrictions to price controls, guild regulations, and monopolistic policies, these laws illuminate the complex intersections of law, economy, and culture, demonstrating that even in commerce, history is full of surprises. Chapter 11. Laws about weather and natural phenomena. Throughout history, humans have tried to control or influence the forces of nature, often through laws that seem utterly bizarre to modern eyes. In medieval Europe, for example, there were laws that prohibited individuals from performing rituals intended to summon rain or storms. These laws were not simply about superstition. They reflected a genuine concern for the safety and stability of the community. In the German principalities of the 16th century, anyone caught attempting to call forth a storm through incantations could face fines or even public humiliation. Authorities believed that meddling with natural phenomena was not only sacrilegious, but also potentially dangerous, as it could lead to misfortune for the entire town. In Venice, a city constantly threatened by flooding, there were strict regulations that required residents to fortify their homes and create temporary barriers during the rainy season. Failing to comply could result in fines, and in some cases, neighbors would be called upon to assist in repairing or reinforcing someone's property. These laws highlight the practical purpose behind seemingly strange legislation, mitigating damage caused by natural disasters. They also reveal how intertwined legal systems were with the natural environment, especially in communities highly dependent on infrastructure vulnerable to floods. In 17th century India, landowners were required by law to keep their livestock away from agricultural fields during the monsoon season. The rationale was simple. Roaming animals could destroy crops and compromise the harvest, threatening the community with food shortages. Violators faced fines or public reprimand. This law illustrates how governments historically attempted to anticipate and prevent problems caused by natural forces, even if their methods now seem unusual or overly prescriptive. Even more peculiar were laws governing celestial events. In medieval England, observing a solar or lunar eclipse without permission from the clergy was considered a transgression. Authorities believed that witnessing such phenomena without proper preparation could disrupt the divine order and invite misfortune. While today we understand these events as purely astronomical, at the time, eclipses were often interpreted as omens, and laws were designed to maintain social and spiritual order. Across different cultures, there were other examples of weather-related laws. In parts of Scandinavia, for instance, fishermen were legally obligated to perform specific rituals before heading out to sea during storm season. Failure to comply could result in fines or confiscation of equipment. These laws were based on a combination of superstition, safety concerns, and communal responsibility. They show that while the reasoning may seem odd, the underlying goal was often to protect lives and property. In some regions, laws even targeted seemingly minor natural phenomena. Certain Italian towns passed ordinances requiring citizens to cover fountains or canals during heavy rain to prevent flooding. In colonial America, some municipalities regulated how snow and ice could be removed from public spaces, including penalties for those who did not manage their property properly, because obstruction of streets could lead to accidents or impede emergency travel. The pattern is clear. Societies throughout history created legislation around natural phenomena, not simply as a reflection of fear or superstition, but as an attempt to maintain order, safety, and predictability in a world where natural events could be catastrophic. These laws reveal the tension between human agency and the uncontrollable forces of nature. By codifying rules about how to react to or prepare for weather events, communities were essentially trying to impose order on chaos. What makes these laws particularly fascinating is the variety and creativity in their enforcement. From fines for improper flood barriers to restrictions on rituals meant to summon rain, governments and local authorities were deeply concerned with both symbolic and practical consequences. They understood that natural disasters could disrupt commerce, food supply, and social harmony, and they often sought to legislate preemptive measures in ways that appear bizarre today. Even beyond Europe and Asia, similar regulations existed worldwide. In some African societies, chiefs would issue directives about when and where certain crops could be planted, relative to the expected rains, backed by social or legal enforcement. In colonial New England, town meetings sometimes enacted rules regarding drainage or damming of rivers, effectively creating community-level weather management laws. Ultimately, laws about weather and natural phenomena provide a window into the priorities, fears, and beliefs of past societies. They remind us that people have long sought to understand, predict, and control the world around them, while modern meteorology has replaced superstition with science. The historical records of these laws reveal a human desire to impose structure and safety in a world governed by unpredictable forces. The ingenuity and sometimes absurdity of these regulations continues to fascinate historians and storytellers alike. Chapter 12. Laws regulating smells and odors. Throughout history, the human sense of smell has been both a source of pleasure and a source of societal regulation. While today we might consider foul odors merely unpleasant, in earlier times they were often seen as a threat to public health, morality, and even social order. Across various cultures and centuries, governments enacted laws specifically targeting odors, both natural and man-made, with surprisingly strict consequences for offenders. In medieval European cities, foul smells were taken extremely seriously. In London during the 14th century, the municipal authorities implemented regulations aimed at controlling the stench of waste and rotting food. Citizens were required to dispose of garbage and animal remains in designated areas or risk fines. The logic was twofold. Eliminating offensive odors improved hygiene and helped prevent the spread of diseases, which were often attributed to miasmas or corrupted air. People believed that bad smells were not only unpleasant, but could carry illness, making odor control a public necessity. Venice, a city built on canals, had particularly detailed laws concerning smells. Residents and merchants were strictly prohibited from dumping fish waste, rotting vegetables, or other foul-smelling refuse into public waterways. Violators faced harsh penalties, including fines, public shaming, and in extreme cases, imprisonment. The regulations reflected both practical concerns, maintaining clean waterways for transport and trade, and social concerns, as unpleasant odors could disrupt the daily life of the densely populated city. In Florence, the authorities went even further. During the Renaissance, specific laws regulated perfumery and scented oils, as excessive use of certain fragrances was considered morally suspect or even deceitful. Citizens could be fined if they used overpowering scents in public, as officials feared that extreme perfumes might mask diseases or serve as distractions from proper social conduct. This illustrates how societies attempted to balance personal freedom with communal responsibility, codifying social norms into legal mandates. Moving beyond Europe, Japan during the Edo period, 1603-1868, also implemented laws regulating odors. Public bathhouses were inspected regularly to ensure cleanliness, and merchants selling fish or meat in marketplaces had strict guidelines about storage and preparation. Those who allowed their goods to emit offensive smells could face fines or have their stalls shut down. Similar laws governed animal waste and sewage management, reflecting a sophisticated understanding of the connection between hygiene, odors, and public health. Even seemingly trivial odors were subject to regulation in history. In 18th century France, certain towns issued ordinances against the stench of unwashed laundry hanging in public streets, particularly in densely populated urban areas. Officials believed that offensive smells could disrupt commerce, attract vermin, and lower the quality of urban life. These laws were a reflection of the broader concern with maintaining order, cleanliness, and civic pride. Interestingly, some laws targeted the human body itself. In parts of colonial America, citizens were required to maintain personal hygiene to prevent offensive odors from disturbing neighbors. Complaints about body odor could lead to fines or public admonishment, particularly in towns with communal living arrangements or closely packed housing. The rationale behind these regulations was rooted in social cohesion, hygiene, and respect for communal spaces. Odor-related laws also intersected with religious and moral codes. In Puritan New England, certain smells were associated with immoral behavior, such as the stench of alcohol, tobacco, or even foods considered inappropriate. Municipal authorities had the power to regulate these odors through fines or restrictions on public activity. Similarly, in parts of the Ottoman Empire, regulations existed concerning the smells associated with certain trades, such as tanning, butchery, and dyeing, where strong odors were believed to offend local sensibilities and disrupt social harmony. What makes these laws particularly fascinating is their combination of practical and symbolic reasoning. On one hand, they addressed real issues: sanitation, disease prevention, and social etiquette. On the other hand, they codified cultural perceptions of morality and civility, transforming subjective judgments about odors into enforceable rules. These laws reveal how societies have historically negotiated the boundaries between private habits and public standards, emphasizing the interconnectedness of health, morality, and legality. In some instances, enforcement could be surprisingly creative. Officials in Italian cities sometimes carried smelling sticks or conducted public inspections of markets and homes, issuing citations to those whose odors violated legal codes. In France, inspectors known as odor police patrolled streets, ensuring that citizens adhered to regulations regarding waste, sewage, and personal hygiene. Even when laws were not strictly enforced, their existence shaped behavior and cultural expectations, highlighting the influence of legislation on daily life. Overall, laws regulating smells and odors offer a remarkable insight into the priorities of past societies. They reveal a world in which hygiene, morality, and social order were intertwined, and in which the human sense of smell was powerful enough to inspire legal regulation. From urban sanitation codes to personal hygiene mandates, these bizarre but fascinating laws remind us that historical societies were acutely aware of the impact of odors on public life. Modern readers may find these laws amusing or extreme, but for the people living under them, compliance was often a matter of survival, reputation, and civic responsibility. In conclusion, the history of odor-related laws demonstrates that even the most mundane aspects of life, such as smells, can be the subject of rigorous legal oversight. By codifying norms related to hygiene, public health, and morality, societies throughout history sought to create order and predictability in an unpredictable world. While today we rely on modern sanitation systems, the bizarre legacy of these regulations continues to captivate historians, offering a unique perspective on how humans have tried to legislate sensory experiences. Chapter 13: Laws Concerning Animals and Pets. Throughout history, humans have shared their lives with animals, but these relationships have often been regulated by law in ways that may seem bizarre today. From livestock management to domestic pets, many societies enacted rules to control, protect, or even exploit animals. These laws reflect not only practical concerns, but also cultural, religious, and social priorities, illustrating how deeply intertwined human life and animal life have been across centuries. In medieval Europe, livestock laws were particularly detailed. Cities and towns often issued ordinances specifying how animals could be kept, grazed, and herded. In England, for example, the assize of nuisances included provisions about animals wandering into public streets or damaging crops. Citizens were held responsible for the behavior of their animals. If a pig wandered into a neighbor's garden and caused damage, the owner could face fines or even physical punishment. Such regulations were essential in densely populated towns where unrestrained animals posed risks to both property and public safety. Some laws were surprisingly specific. In 16th century London, pigs were prohibited from wandering the streets during the day, and anyone caught allowing their pig to root through public waste could be fined. In addition, horse owners were required to maintain their animals' health and cleanliness, particularly because horses were a major mode of transport. Regulations concerning the appearance and treatment of animals highlight both practical concerns and social expectations. Animals were not only functional assets, but also symbols of civic responsibility and respectability. Moving beyond Europe, Japan during the Edo period had laws concerning domestic and working animals. Pet ownership, particularly of dogs, was regulated, and owners could be fined if their animals caused a public disturbance or became a nuisance. Cats, too, had protective laws, as they were valued for controlling rodent populations. Furthermore, livestock such as cattle and pigs were subject to inspections and seasonal restrictions to prevent disease outbreaks and maintain public health. These regulations demonstrate the careful attention governments paid to the welfare and management of animals, recognizing their economic and social importance. In colonial America, animal-related laws were similarly detailed. Communities issued ordinances to prevent livestock from roaming freely, as uncontrolled animals could damage crops or property. In Massachusetts, for instance, residents were required to fence their animals, and failure to do so could result in fines. But beyond practical concerns, there were moral dimensions as well. Some colonies passed laws against cruelty to animals, reflecting religious and ethical beliefs about the humane treatment of creatures. Punishments for mistreatment ranged from fines to public humiliation, indicating that communities took animal welfare seriously. Certain laws even addressed the behavior of animals themselves. In medieval England, there were records of legal cases in which animals were tried for crimes. For example, pigs accused of attacking humans could be sentenced to execution, and dogs involved in biting incidents might be legally destroyed. While these laws may appear absurd today, they reveal the legal logic of the time. Animals were viewed as capable of causing social harm, and communities sought to manage that harm through formal legal processes. Pet ownership laws also often intersected with social status. In Renaissance Europe, the right to own certain exotic or rare animals was restricted to the nobility or wealthy merchants. Owning a peacock, a monkey, or a falcon could require royal permission, and unauthorized possession could result in fines or confiscation. These regulations reinforced social hierarchies, demonstrating how laws concerning animals could serve both practical and symbolic purposes. In addition to exotic animals, common pets such as dogs and cats were subject to legal regulation in urban areas. In 18th century France, for instance, municipal authorities imposed rules requiring dogs to wear collars and be licensed. Unregistered or aggressive animals could be seized, and owners faced fines or criminal charges. The rationale behind these laws was both public safety and urban hygiene. Stray or unregulated animals were seen as threats to human health, property, and order. Beyond Europe and Asia, similar concerns existed in the Ottoman Empire, where laws regulated the care of working animals such as horses, camels, and donkeys. Owners were expected to feed, shelter, and treat their animals adequately, and failure to do so could result in fines or corporal punishment. In rural communities, these laws were vital for economic stability, as animals were essential to transportation, agriculture, and trade. The careful regulation of animal welfare underscores how societies depended on animals not only for practical purposes, but also as moral and social obligations. Some laws targeted unusual situations. In 17th century England, beekeepers were required to maintain hives in ways that prevented swarming and damage to neighbors' property. Meanwhile, in various European towns, pigeons and doves were sometimes legally protected because of their economic or religious significance. In these cases, the law functioned as a mediator between human interests, environmental concerns, and cultural practices, highlighting the complex relationships between humans and animals throughout history. Overall, laws concerning animals and pets illustrate a fascinating aspect of legal history. They reveal how societies attempted to balance human needs with the welfare of animals, enforce public order, and reinforce social hierarchies. From regulating livestock in urban streets to controlling exotic pets, these legal provisions show that human civilization has long been intertwined with the lives of animals. While some laws may appear odd or even humorous today, they were rooted in practical necessity, ethical reasoning, and cultural norms. In conclusion, the history of animal and pet legislation demonstrates that legal systems have historically extended beyond humans to encompass the broader ecosystem in which societies lived. Whether ensuring public safety, protecting economic assets, or safeguarding animal welfare, these laws provide a window into the priorities, values, and everyday realities of past civilizations. They remind us that throughout history, the care, management, and regulation of animals were serious matters with real consequences for those who failed to comply. Chapter 14. Legacy of Weird Laws. Throughout history, the myriad of bizarre and unusual laws that have been enacted may appear humorous, absurd, or even nonsensical to modern audiences. Yet, these laws, ranging from restrictions on clothing and pets to rules about personal behavior and consumption, offer a profound insight into the values, fears, and priorities of the societies that created them. While many of these laws have been repealed or forgotten, their legacy continues to influence modern legal systems, social norms, and even popular culture. One of the most striking aspects of historical weird laws is how they reveal the intersection of governance and daily life. Laws were often created to maintain social order, protect economic interests, or enforce religious and moral codes. For instance, laws regulating what individuals could wear, which foods they could consume, or how they could interact with family members reflected societal anxieties about hierarchy, morality, and propriety. Although such regulations may seem trivial or amusing today, they were taken very seriously at the time, often backed by fines, imprisonment, or public shaming. In the modern era, the echoes of these laws can still be seen in regulatory systems. Consider food safety codes, which have evolved from ancient restrictions on ingredients and preparation methods. Likewise, animal welfare laws today have their roots in medieval and early modern ordinances that govern the care, treatment, and containment of domestic and working animals. Even zoning laws and municipal ordinances about street behavior can trace conceptual lineage to historical regulations governing the movement and conduct of citizens within towns and cities. In this way, what once appeared as eccentric or arbitrary rules often laid the groundwork for practical, enduring legal frameworks. The legacy of weird laws is not only legal, but cultural. Odd, humorous, or archaic laws continue to capture public imagination, inspiring books, documentaries, and media content. Websites and social media channels devoted to weird laws often highlight the most outrageous or ironic regulations, turning legal history into entertainment, while simultaneously educating audiences about historical context. This cultural fascination underscores the human attraction to novelty, curiosity, and humor, demonstrating that even regulations designed to enforce conformity can become sources of fascination and amusement centuries later. Moreover, weird laws highlight how societies adapt and change. Many laws that were once strictly enforced have become obsolete, reflecting evolving social attitudes and technological advancements. For example, sumptuary laws that dictated clothing and appearance have largely vanished, as have restrictions on street behavior that were specific to pre-industrial urban planning. These shifts illustrate the dynamic relationship between law, culture, and human behavior. As societies evolve, laws adapt, disappear, or are reinterpreted, leaving behind a patchwork of legal history that can seem strange to contemporary eyes. Yet, some odd laws persist in modern legal systems, sometimes with surprising consequences. In the United States, for instance, certain municipal codes dating back decades or even centuries remain technically enforceable, despite being widely ignored. Laws prohibiting animals from certain locations, restricting unusual modes of dress, or regulating behavior in public spaces may still exist on the books, occasionally resurfacing in unusual court cases or local controversies. The survival of these laws illustrates both the durability of legal language and the occasional inertia of legislative processes, offering a living connection to the past. Importantly, the study of weird laws also encourages reflection on broader social values. By examining why certain behaviors were criminalized or restricted, historians and legal scholars can uncover insights into issues of power, class, religion, and morality. Laws are not neutral. They reflect societal priorities and hierarchies. For example, restrictions on dress or appearance often reinforce social status, while laws governing food or drink could serve both moralistic and economic purposes. Similarly, animal and pet regulations reveal the practical and ethical concerns of communities that depended heavily on animals for survival and work. Through this lens, even the most bizarre laws acquire a deeper significance, shedding light on the complex interplay between governance and human life. As we look back at the long history of unusual legislation, it is clear that weird laws are more than historical curiosities. They are markers of human ingenuity, societal concern, and the continuous struggle to balance individual freedom with collective order. They demonstrate that legal systems have always been living frameworks, responding to shifting needs, cultural norms, and technological developments. Even in their oddity, these laws tell stories about the people who created them, the societies that enforced them, and the values that guided human civilization across centuries. In conclusion, the legacy of weird laws serves as both a source of amusement and a profound historical lesson. They remind us that laws, no matter how peculiar, emerge from the realities, fears, and priorities of their time. They also show that legal frameworks evolve, adapt, and sometimes outlive their original context. leaving traces that continue to fascinate and inform modern audiences. By studying these unusual regulations, we gain insight into the creative, cautious, and often humorous ways humans have sought to order their world. As we end this exploration of the strangest laws in history, it is worth reflecting on the enduring human tendency to codify behavior in surprising ways. From bizarre clothing restrictions to intricate rules governing animals, food, and daily conduct, the tapestry of legal history is rich, strange, and endlessly revealing. Whether we laugh at their absurdity or admire the ingenuity behind their creation, weird laws remind us that human societies have always been imaginative in the ways they govern behavior. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the curious, fascinating, and sometimes absurd world of historical legislation. We hope this exploration has entertained, educated, and inspired curiosity about the strange ways laws shape our lives. Good night, and may your own life remain free of unnecessarily peculiar rules.